So the focus of this session is really on adapting to change. So like everything else, national research facilities have to adapt to changes in the environment in which they operate. And these changes can be incremental, or as the pandemic has shown us, they can be sudden and transformative. So, but without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Volker to start us off with a presentation about Vito Intervac and how they've responded to the pandemic. So off to you, Volker. And Alex will put up your slides in just a moment.
Well, thanks very much, Mark, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for organizing such an interesting workshop. I think we all have lots of thoughts on what the challenges have been given the global situation and what our organizations had to go through. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to highlight a few things that Vito has been able to do and accomplish over the last few months, and really has helped Canada to respond to this pandemic. And then, as the title says, also talk a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities we have seen. Next slide, please. For those of you that are not familiar with it, so Vito is a research center here at the University of Saskatchewan. We have more than 45 years of expertise in both human and animal health, currently about 160 staff members and a budget of about $20 million. And in the context of this, most importantly, we operate some of the most advanced infrastructure in Canada and even around the world. Next slide, please. And this is the International Vaccine Center, one of the 10 MSIs in the countries. And this is where we are receiving support from CFI. This is one of the world's largest CL3 ag facilities. So that means containment level 3 ag, which is even higher than that. It's a research hotel that is specifically designed to foster academic and industry collaborations. It's available to users from all over Canada, but also from around the globe to use the facility here and do their research here. And this is what we have used in particular now for our response to COVID-19. We're currently constructing an in-house manufacturing facility right in this glass building here on the right side. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse now or not, but you can see there's this glass wing, and it's essentially the third floor in which we're building this new manufacturing facility. Next slide, please. So in terms of responding to COVID-19, we were one of the first organizations in the country to respond to it. Much of this was actually done in collaborations with others. For example, the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg at the Public Health Agency, or CFIA in Winnipeg. Very early on, we reached out to our partners and said, you know, we are here to help you, tell us what you need us to do, and so on. And Vito was the first organization in the country to isolate the virus. This was done from one of the early patient samples, one of the first cases. The sample was isolated by the colleagues at Sunnybrook Health, and then sent to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg sent it to us, and we were able then to isolate it. We were the first in Canada to have an animal model established, and you need these animal models to be able to evaluate new vaccines, drugs, antivirals, or therapeutics. And we're now the first university to have a vaccine candidate in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical testing. We're currently in phase 1, but it's a combined phase 1, phase 2. So we're rolling right into a phase 2 trial. And we worked with more than 80 companies since January of last year. And that actually is one of the challenges that we have seen now. We're doing about 10 times the contract volume right now, helping other Canadian companies and other Canadian groups on identifying solutions for this disease, but I'll get back to that later on. Next slide, please. This is the funding that we received last year. And so you can see there is essentially 3 elements to it. There is money directly allocated for developing the vaccine, and which is now in clinical trials. Then CFI announced $11.3 million. And that was money that really helped us to enhance our research capacity. And I want to point that out. It was so important that CFI was really, really flexible in how this money can be used. And it helped us to bring in over 35 new staff members, train them, and get them working on this COVID-19. But at the same time, also be able to reallocate internal staff members and resources towards this project. So the flexibility in this funding has really helped us a lot in responding so quickly. You can see there is $12 million through ISED for the construction of the manufacturing facility. And then also very, very important to highlight, the province of Saskatchewan also stepped up significantly last year by giving us $4.2 million, both for the manufacturing facility, but also for the vaccine research. And their funding is actually directly going into our vaccine that is now in clinical trials. And you can see we were collaborators on a number of CHR grants. Next slide, please. Very important, of course, in getting this support as well. So this is the team that we have been able over the last few months to assemble. You can see there is now many, many individuals that are involved directly in the COVID-19 research. And this is really one of the challenges that we have seen in responding to this pandemic, recruiting enough people so that we don't burn out our existing staff. And worker fatigue and burnout is a real thing, especially if you have to work in high containment, where you wear PPEs and so on, where you can't go to the washroom, where you can't have a drink for hours, sometimes for 6 hours at a time. So what we planned and what we implemented is kind of like almost shift works, where some of the members are starting early in the morning and others are starting around noon, and they were extending what we can do in a day in making the process more effective. What we also learned is that it is very important for us, and I'll come back to that later on, if we think about future emerging diseases, to ensure that we have enough trained workers around. We now think that it takes about 5 months from starting the recruitment process to bringing a person in, to properly training them to work in high containment and get the level where we confidently, and the worker is confident, to work with a potentially deadly virus. It takes some time to be trained. And so if we want to think about how Canada can be better prepared for the next time, that's really, I think, an area that we need to think about, that we always have enough expertise and workers able to immediately respond to these threats. Next slide, please. And then you can see, over the last year, we have worked a lot with other Canadian organizations. VIDO really has become one of the go-to places in Canada for COVID-19 research. You can see both on the government as well as on the academic side, we've had lots of interactions, lots of collaborations, and as I mentioned, more than 40 Canadian companies have had VIDO test their products, their vaccines, their drugs, and their antivirals. We've been also able to second professors from other universities. You can see here Professor Alison Kelvin, who's from Dalhousie University and now here at VIDO for a year. And similar, Jason Kindrachuk, who is a Canada Research Chair for Emerging Diseases from the University of Manitoba, who also came for a year with his group to help us in responding to this pandemic. Next slide, please. So this is referring to what we call contract research. This is really what the MSI is all about. This is our mandate, helping Canadian companies, Canadian academic researchers, and even the government to find solutions for this crisis. And so we have completed in the last 12 months more than 80 contracts, or working on some of these still, 50% roughly Canadian and 50% international. And you can see the focus there is on antivirals, therapeutics, but also on vaccines. And many of the Canadian vaccines that are currently in development have been tested here at VIDO in our animal models. This is all possible because we are ISO certified, and we have a dedicated contract research group with certified project managers and so on that are specifically trained and their skills are in facilitating all this contract. But again, this is about 10 times the volume that we normally do, and that has created huge challenges for us in the organization in just simply being able to keep up with all that work. Important that all of this is supported, of course, through the MSI program and the government of Saskatchewan. And it's important to recognize the contributions there. Next slide, please. This is just to highlight our own vaccine. You may have seen in the news. One of the activities, of course, is to develop our own vaccine. We're now in clinical trials. And you can see we've given many presentations to Canada Vaccine Task Force and so on. And we're looking forward now in organizing the next phase, which is really the phase 3 trials, and then eventually getting it into the arm of Canadians. Next slide, please. This is the manufacturing facility that we're building right now. So this is how our manufacturing facility might look in the future. Next slide, please. And this is how it looks at the moment. So construction is underway. You can see the piping and all that is now in place. The walls are about to go up and within the next few weeks. And you can see in the long term, this facility is able or will be able to make all kinds of vaccines except for the RNA vaccines, and produce as much as even 40 million doses a year. Construction is complete or scheduled to be complete by October of this year, and then we're hoping that we are able to start our first production runs sometime next year. Next slide, please. So what were some of these challenges? Well, as I mentioned, the contract research, the reallocation of the resources, the shortage of trained workers that we had. Although we had groups working in high containment, the manpower issue, people are quickly burning out, the fatigue and so on. And so early on, we pushed for bringing in more people. CFI was very supportive there and helped us a lot in making that possible. As I mentioned, we hired more than 35 additional staff members. But even as I said, it takes a while before a person can work in high containment. This is not a regular lab. You have to be well trained. You have to work in buddy systems and so on. And of course, you're working with a potentially very serious pathogen. Of course, we do this all by ensuring the worker safety. And again, these public health measures are absolutely important for us and have taken a lot of time considering, for example, working in cohorts rather than having whole groups working. What do we do when we have our first case? How can we contain it as much as possible? We have done a lot of planning on trying to come up with the best strategy of mitigate the impact as much as possible. And then, of course, on the other hand, we're seeing that there is a reduction of all the or most of the non-COVID-19 research activities, and that by its own also has created a lot of challenges to our organization. Next slide. At the same time, of course, this also offers a lot of opportunities for the future. And really the message, I think, is that we are giving and that all of us are strongly feeling this is exactly what we're here for. We do have the infrastructure through the MSI program, through CFI funding, and we do have the expertise. This is why VIDO exists. This is why we are this is our mandate to respond. And so as part of Intervac and the MSI, we really have taken our mandate to work with academics and companies very, very serious. As I mentioned, more than 80 companies, a lot of our energy and resources has gone into that work, which we think has direct benefit on the lives of Canadians. It also has created, of course, the opportunity for more national and international collaborations on the vaccines, on the drugs, on the therapeutics, on the small molecules, and so on, and really is benefiting Canada overall in terms of its innovation ecosystem, attracting SMEs and pharma to Canada, and of course also helping us in being better prepared for the next one. And that's really the last point there, helping to shape Canada's preparedness. VIDO is really now one of the key centers in the country that has the ability and the infrastructure to respond to these emerging diseases. And this is really how we see our organization can help the country to be better prepared for the future and play a significant role in Canada's biomanufacturing and innovation strategy. Next slide, please. And so the key here is really that I think when we think about these emerging diseases, we all now understand what the impact of these diseases is. And it's just a matter of time before the next one comes, even on the animal side. And so what we need to have in place are these key centers in the country that can work together as a network of centers and can specifically focus on emerging infectious diseases and respond quickly. And so the point that this slide that I wanted to make here is that as a country, we need to think about how we support and long-term operate these centers. And it's like, like I'm trying to show with these two pictures there of the firefighters in New York and the fire department. It is almost like a fire insurance. You want to have these workers trained and in place before the fire breaks out and not after. And that's really the message that I wanted to give everyone. That's why these MSIs are so important. That's why it is so important to have these critical infrastructure centers in the country. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm done with my presentation, just to acknowledge, of course, the generous support by the government, both of Canada as well as Saskatchewan, CFI, CHR, and the many private funders that have now come forward in supporting our activities here at VITO. Thank you so much.